a digital anthology project where we try to, like create a digital archive of stories of Northeast and queer people, the lived realities of Northeast and queer people. The name is Chinky Homo Project because we feel that the people from there are still these two words, chinky and homo, basically still goes on to define the way we are understood by the larger mainstream community. This word features where I feel like the two word itself is very loaded. People wants to sort of like question it, people who want to reclaim it, people, and so many other ways of dealing with it. And we just thought that it is a too good word to sort of create that sort of a created noise around this issue. And there are various things in which we've been working as part of our own process of digitizing narratives, mostly oral narratives, because LGBTQIA people and minorities, we don't necessarily have a lot of resources to, like record in terms of literature. We don't have, I mean, the reason why we don't have literature is because we do not have the access to such facilities. So most of the stories about our lived realities are still something that exists in oral narratives in our intimate spaces. So digitizing, bringing that forth to the world through digitizing and creating a digital archive is what we do. And while working with various issues back at home and also with a lot of network back at home, the organizations, there are lots of queer groups back at home now, Homonoi, Yaol, Amana, Ita, Atma, you name it, and every city usually have a cohort of LGBTQIA activists doing a lot of activism there. So one of the things that we have found out is basically this lack of mental health needs and lack of facilities that where people can go to in terms of their mental health needs, not just the lack of facilities but just the how important it is in our lives, how important it is to look at mental health in our lives, how significant it is in terms of looking into the LGBTQIA lit realities. These are various things that we were interested, and that's when Belongg, Sarans get reach out to us, and we thought we should have a conversation around it. And we'll try to get together a lot of people who we know will be bringing a lot of interesting accounts into it. Mann Mela, on that hand, is a project by Sangath, and also it's part of the project It's Okay to Talk, where basically what Mann Mela is trying to do is trying to break that taboo around speaking around mental health. It's something that is very similar between mental health and LGBTQIA rights, is how like this particular discourse has just gotten out of that ambit of being shamed and being considered negative and associated with a lot of negative. The same thing, one thing that Diti brought out during our pre-panel discussion yesterday was about how this, like LGBTQIA at the same time mental health, it being connected to a certain idea of madness, and hence a lot of a connection to it. And what Man Mela does is basically try to bring forth a lot of stories about people who have survivors of mental health problems in their life, and their coping mechanisms, what is their struggle been, but at the same time creating that culture and trend where talking about mental health is okay. There's because of the taboo and stigma around it of being termed as somebody who's incapable. They sort of, when you associate yourself with something like mental health, it sort of has this very general sense of taking away certain incapacities on your part. It hinders on your ability to make decisions on your own. A lot of the other things that I think today's discussion will bring out. But yeah, what that is one thing I know about Man Mela. They're trying to create this positive attitude around talking about mental health, which I've also been part of that project. I was one of the contributor as a gender non-binary person. Within the scope of Mann Mela also was raising this kind of identities in terms of gender variations, gender expressions, as well as sexual orientation, sexuality, location, geopolitical location, caste, class, all of the diversities that the Mann Mela project has brought out. Definitely one of the most resourceful space I want to look into in terms of mental health. Will you also like to add on to like what Sangath do and then also Mann Mela, and it's okay to talk from your part.
Thank you, Pavel.
Hi, Harikeerthan. Would you add in? Would you like to add
Yes,
in something to it? What Sangath do? I think this can also be a project. This can also run as a running introduction of all of us together. Yeah.
sure. Thank you. So Mann Mela is a project run by Sangath. Sangath is a mental health research organization, uh, which is based out of Goa. We also have offices in Bhopal, Delhi, and Pune. It is a 25-year-old organization. We do a lot of collaborative interdisciplinary research. Uh, and Mann Mela is one of our projects funded by the Wellcome Trust. And yeah, on the same line, I would like to also introduce Transcare, since Saransh has put the link in the project in the chat window. Transcare is one of our latest projects, which is a collaborative effort by Sangath. We have Dr. Aqsa on board as a co-investigator, Dr. Satyendra Singh from UCMS,
Okay, so I think we lost. Am I audible, Dan?
Yes, yes, yes. I
So
started
sorry.
my I switched.
I think we lost Hari, but all of the links and the websites have been mentioned below. I just want to bring in Dan, who will be the moderator for today's session. Just a quick intro of Dan. Dan is a full-time primary school teacher and a part-time artist. They are also co-curator of Thane Queer Collective. I go by the pronouns he and they, and it's the same with Dan. Dan also goes by the pronouns he and they. So, handing you this panel now, Dan.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure that this opportunity has been given to me. I mean, for the first time, I'm doing something like this. So excuse me if I don't know what I'm. If it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, but it's a really important conversation that we are having. My volume is low. Okay,
It's fine. It's fine.
it's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation, and even by the pre-discussion that we had yesterday, it was really nice. I would like to start with. I mean, Neil, can you? I would like you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm Neel. Is my audio clear?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Neel, and I work at the Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality at Ashoka University. My pronouns are she and her. And it's first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be with such amazing people here, talking about a very pertinent issue in our trans lives. So I have prepared something written. If you would like me to go now, I can go now, or I can go later as well. Uh, Anything is fine with me then. Would
I
you like
think
me to?
would you like to go in the end so we
Okay,
can I think
sure.
like I know what you want to talk about, and it would be nice if we could, like, start talking about that
Sure.
together, like. Aqsa ma'am, you you can go ahead introducing yourself.
Thanks, Dan, and it's just Aksa, not Aksa, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Like,
Only Aksa. Yeah.
निकल जाता है.
Right. So I'm Aqsa Shaikh. I'm a medical doctor and I'm also a medical teacher. I am associate professor of community medicine at Jamia Hamdard. I teach medical students. I also head the COVID vaccination center at the same place. In addition, I'm also the co-investigator in a lot of other research projects. The more important one related to the theme of today is the Trans Care Project, which is being done by Sangath Institute and is funded by the Thakur Foundation. In addition, I also am the director of an NGO called Human Solidarity Foundation. And my pronouns are she or her.
Then we have Diti. Where is Diti? I can't see them.
Hi, I'm Diti. I work with Sangath, a feminist network, which is different from the Sangath that has been introduced already.
Okay, thank you.
We are a feminist network that we do capacity building work trainings. We do workshops. We do networking. We do campaigns. Yeah, and we are a very small team, and I'm the coordinator of Sangath. Apart from that, I'm trying to do my PhD in women's studies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, failing badly, and maybe that is one of the things that might come up here. But yeah, I'm not really working on mental health per se at any professional capacity, but I come here today probably with whatever personal experience of having um, been part of the system through uh, accessing the services of mental health providers and having dealt with mental health issues for several years now. And yeah, that's where I am no expert in this mental health field, and I have to give that disclaimer. I'm here as a trans person, a trans masculine person. I go by he they pronouns, and that's Dan, you're on mute.
Okay, I said Hari can go. Like you can introduce yourself, Hari.
Thank you, Dan. So I would also like to start with a disclaimer. I am a cis heterosexual man, and I'm a very late comer into this area of learning about trans health needs. I'm a medical doctor trained from CMC Vellore, and I've done public health training from the London School of Economics. But I started learning about this only around 2 years back. I mean, learning about all the different issues, needs, and challenges of the trans community around 2 years back. It was not covered in my medical education, and it has been a steep learning curve. I would describe myself as an early career public health researcher. I'm associated with Sangath. I'm a project coordinator for trans care, which Aqsa mentioned, and also a few other projects. So yes, that's it.
Pavel, would you like to introduce yourself again, or like?
Yeah, all right. Okay, about myself, my name is Sagolsem Pavel Meite. I'm from Manipur. Currently, I'm in Delhi. I identify as a gender non-binary femme person, so I go by any pronoun. But yeah, sometimes it's really interesting when people do refer to me with she or z or they, because that is not something we come across every day. But yeah, but as a gender non-binary person, I go with any pronoun. Um, so currently I am working as a freelance person on gender, sex, and sexuality, just taking up freelance consultancy work. Prior to that, I worked in Nazaria Queer Feminist Resource Group as a program manager there. And one thing that I particularly worked on while in Nazaria was this perspective of self-care for human rights defenders, which I think I'll try to bring in today's discussion wherever it is where I can plug it in. Prior to that, I worked with Breakthrough on making cities safer and safer for women and girls, and with the Center for Health Association, which focuses on engaging with men and boys for gender justice.
Mm.
So another thing that I would like to
Your
bring in
audio
from
is
my this two
your
prior
audio is glitching.
experience idea of safe space, which I think the development industry is fairly, and something that we've been really engaging with. But and I think when it comes to inclusive or transformative sense of safe space. My audio is breaking. Okay. And I'm also co-founder of Chinky Homo Project. So that's about it.
Okay. Neil, now you can go ahead. Neil.
You can hear me now? Okay. Um, so mine is really a collection of thoughts, and I will be tying it with how we need to understand a trans-inclusive mental health discourse, and what we can do, not just at the ground level, but also at the policy, at the research, and at the academic level. Um, so, a glaring lacuna in the Trans Act, apart from its many other wrongs it harbors, is the definition of a family. And it says, I quote, family means a group of people related by blood or marriage or by adoption made in accordance with law. Now, in trans parlance, the word family has perhaps a very different meaning in our lives, that we often don't find refuge we seek in our natal homes. Precisely because, unlike sexuality, gender for trans persons is a heavier compound word to fit so simply in the heteronormative framework of the homes we come from. And why, unlike sexuality, the act of subverting the norm for us trans persons doesn't merely manifest in the privacy of our rooms, but in the vast, complicated, and messy ways we experience the world around us. A natal home is where these subversive experiences are far more under scrutiny. And to accord some form of, piousness to the home as this great sanctuary where you must always be safe, is sometimes a factual error in the very real and everyday lives of trans persons. I'm not necessarily talking about physical violence, but a more intimate hurt to your body, that is to not feel affirmed in your self-perceived gender identity. What else is a safe space? It is but a space where you're happy. To think toward a trans inclusive understanding of mental health, we foremost need to be asked what is home to us and what does a care space look like? For many of us, we make homes where we go. I did so when I moved from my hometown to Delhi in pursuit of higher education. And the and the friends I made here and the relationships I nurtured became part of my home, what you would call my chosen home. And to say that it is chosen is to foreground the agency of trans persons to willfully be in an atmosphere free of surveillance and harm. The choice to a home needs to be understood as fundamental to our well-being. And we need to shift what I would like to point here from a biomedical grammar to a gender affirming grammar in mental health that takes into account the very idea of a care space as not a rehabilitative space, but a reassuring one. When I came to Delhi a couple of years back, I was still struggling with, I won't say acceptance of my own gender, but affirmations. And what do I mean by that? These affirmations need not be biomedical in nature, but tangible in ways that my gender is affirmed, similar to the ways I see it in my eyes. These affirmations can, for example, simply be vocal affirmations. You see, speech comes instinctively to us in calling our sisters she and our brothers he. And while it's not perfect and pronouns are much more than words, our instinct to name the bodies we come in contact with, the relationships we are accustomed to, is influenced by messages around us and our perceptions of masculinities and femininities. We have studied, that speech is performative. And to say that it is performative is to say that it is performed over and over again, We rehearse our roles as much as the expectations of them in the ways we ought to react and express ourselves at home and in public, as well as in digital spaces. But I'm not talking about speech. I'm trying to break speech, go speech beyond definitions or concepts, beyond the architecture of language. Speech, what I say, is how we communicate and engage. It is palpable, like a gift of sari from a friend to you. The gift of sari to me will not be just an offering of love, but it also will be the language it was offered with. For example, I would love to see you in this sari. You will look so pretty. It is a tender, affectionate act between friends, an assurance that my femininity is valid and my presence as a woman is not an aberration in a shared space where women in many bodies across many identities carry an equal but an unalike hold over the changing grammar of gender and sexuality. Something very simple, such as saying my daughter, my granddaughter, or my niece, is a far-fetched thing in my mind. Um, and what I'm trying to say is that these mental health affirmations, these speech affirmations, one example of that, needs to be understood as affirmations that sustain mental health of trans persons. And when we think about a trans inclusive discourse, a framework on mental health, we need to bring these perspectives into the fold. And where do we find these affirmations? We find them in our safe spaces. This can be the home of our friend. This can be where we work, where we organize and mobilize, the spaces of food, love, and comfort. And where conversations are intimate, that which is, almost organically created without a need to be defined as some kind of rehabilitative space. A trans inclusive mental health framework needs to work at the ground level of thinking that is rooted in the very lived realities of trans persons. A trans inclusive framework foregrounds trans lives and not trans bodies. What this means is that the discourse on mental health be mindful of the trajectories of trans lives, their livelihoods, cultures, and coexistence. Don't isolate us as the third gender or the exotic other. An isolationary worldview does not recognize the communities, households, and relationships we are a part of. It devalues the seemingly material and sensual ways we experience transness around us. Instead, a coexistent worldview takes into account these mundane ways as it revolves around the dynamics of desire, pleasure, and joy. You see, mental health does not work in isolation. As much as one relies on the theoretical principles, of what can be a gender affirming approach to mental health, one will also need to rely on practices that shape and give rise to diverse trans experiences. In other words, a critical approach to transforming the mental health paradigm will need a model developed and distributed by trans practitioners. The work needs to be at the conceptual level and not only at the field. The blueprint must require a revisit. Such interventions need a learning curve to not just organizations, but also at the level of research and methodology. And the latter is unfortunately scanty. And here is where perhaps what academic centers like ours can play its part. The role of academic institutions in bridging the theory and practice gap that I was talking about just now. And what we can do is invite diverse perspectives from the archive as much as the material work in the field that grassroots organizations have been doing. Academic spaces, most importantly, can facilitate knowledge building practices through conversations, critical inquiries, and questioning existing discourses in terms of bringing more awareness and building more solidarities. What we're trying to do here at the Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality and is precisely to liaison with practitioners, facilitators, activists, educators, and teachers, and learn from each other's best practices. And to conclude, what I would like to say is that the very pertinent work of trans inclusivity has to has to be a work informed by each other, a work in conjunction with the perspectives that also make us queer, that also make us feminist. That's something. And I look forward to all of you who be sharing lovely points, and I will try to connect with them. Thank you.
I mean, that was really, really, it was beautiful. I mean, it feels like you summed up everything that you wanted to talk about in all the words that uh, all the words that you used. It was, I'm just stunned right now. Like I, I need time. I mean, I want you to send it to me, please. Like the write up that you've written. I would love to go back to it every time and feel affirmed in myself. Yeah. Uh, and especially the point where you talked about the language that people around us use for us. Like I can completely relate to it when I came out to one of my cousins, and then he said that you are my brother now, and that was just like enough for me. I mean, uh, yeah, I think we can.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. Does any of the other panelists have anything to say about what Neil just mentioned, talked about the piece that she wrote?
Yeah, so it was like, as you mentioned, Dan, it was really, very, very heartwarming to hear. I wouldn't call it a write-up. I mean, it's basically, the emotions,
Yes.
which Neil has poured. And it reminded me of an essay which I had penned for a book. The essay was titled Home Sweet Home with a question mark. And it was written on the theme of domestic abuse that trans persons and gender non-conforming persons faced, especially during the lockdown in 2020, and how the lack of mental health support and services made it all worse. And the quote, which I had used in that essay was by Maya Angelou, and it says, "The ache for home lives in all of us. The safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." So what Neil has basically mentioned, is completely a gist of all the experiences which a lot of us have had in the last year and unfortunately continue to have even in 2021, because the situations haven't really much changed. And when it comes to the mental health support, and especially the support by our native families, that's something really always lacking. And though we keep on holding to the hope, we also know that it's not really so much optimism.
Yeah. Anyone else wants to say anything about this?
Yeah, can I go?
Yes.
I mean, Neil, I can't like imagine a better way to open this, because I think the idea of the home resonates so much with trans lives and queer lives. And your idea of the home reminds me of this beautiful essay by Gloria, book by Gloria Anzaldúa, who talks about how homophobia is actually the fear of going home and going to the family, because the idea of the home is always so complicated for queer lives, because it's marked by a sense of non-belonging, is what she writes. So there's this constant fear of being abandoned by the family, by the tribe, by the community, and yet you do not lose touch with its origins, and instead you um, carry this home wherever you go. And your queerness is thus also a resistance against this kind of domestication, right? And I think the Chinky Homo Project will be able to bring this beautifully, Pavel, if because that is also, like you carry your chinkiness wherever you go when you migrate, because we were talking about migration and the diaspora yesterday. um and why, this journey for the home, this journey and this quest for the home and the resistance against this domestication has always been there. It's also marked by so many scars. And but I talk a lot about my scars of being in an academic space, because that is where I have resided for about 10 years now. And as much as I'm half foot out of it, I'm also like half foot inside it. And yeah, also because the whole education system is constantly harping on soundness of mind. It pushes the queer person outside of it, while a large number of us today are able to access the space in some ways because of our privilege. There are also like so many more dropouts from this space, and because gender is reinforced within the education system in so many ways. And while for instance university spaces are today so much more open to say research on transgender people, how many of these researches are conducted by trans people? And uh, wherever there is a research conducted on trans life, there is this whole harping on the need to cognitive coherence, and the whole need to be coherent, this whole need to emphasize on a certain kind of academic rigor, certain kind of meritocracy, which is something that a lot of people from the margins um, have had difficulty working through. And I think my idea of the home also is very strongly connected to the campus space, because when I couldn't find a space within my natal family, living within the campus space was one sort of space where I did or tried to find some kind of a family, some kind of comfort zone. At the same time, trying to gain some kind of epistemic authority within that space. However, yeah, within this whole liberal agenda, where we must be successful in a certain way, where we must be coherent in a certain way, I think the trans narrative, the trans life will always be this outlier, or at the most be an interloper in that space where you're not wanted. But we will, if you fit into the discipline, we will sort of give you that kind of space. Another point that I also connected to the home, because I'll tell you how in a while. But one another space has been of trans masculinity and my sexuality, because as a trans masculine person, and a feminist, reconciling with the idea of masculinity and the idea of masculinity that is presented before us in society within a patriarchal context, I think it is impossible. I mean, I took a very long time to come to terms with uh, the identity of masculinity, and um, to see myself somewhere there. And it's also um, you know this constant need to prove that one is a man, and to be a man you have to be a certain way, you have to look masculine in the stereotypical way, you have to like black and blues, and of course you cannot like colors, you cannot like makeup, you cannot like heels, you cannot like dresses, and you cannot like boys. Hello. So and this is a two-way street, because like while we have this within the community where you're um, where you constantly need to prove your masculinity within the trans masculine circle itself, there is also like this whole need to prove it to the world, right? So so for instance, if I go to a gid, go to a psychiatrist or go to a counselor seeking for a gid, or just generally counseling, I have to sort of try just to wrap my to get a GID certificate. It's so I have to probably lie about my own sexuality, or I will have to say, no, I like bikes, because hello, boys like bikes, and I have to like bikes, and I have to play cricket to be able to get just that certification. And which just means that there has always been this expert, the doctor, who will say, oh, right now you are ready for surgery, right now you're ready for hormones, or okay, if you have so much dysphoria, you're ready for surgery, if you have so much discomfort, this is when you are just ready. And it is always this other, no, most probably not a trans person who has not lived through your experience, who is going to be the expert of your lives. And this has been the case with social sciences academic research, and it has been the case with and just generally understanding trans lives from a biomedical, from a psychosocial lens as well. And at the same time, like trying to find a family, trying to find a comfort space within the trans masculine community has been equally if not more difficult, because as a gay trans masculine person, you to find that kind of information that Neel was talking about is so much more difficult, because you will probably be constantly misgendered, or you'll probably constantly be referred to as your partner's girlfriend, because and yeah, so and yeah, I think that is what I would like to put to table for now. So I keep saying that, we when we talk about trying to find solutions, or try to find imagine uh, uh, any solutions for the trans problem, we call there is this whole concept that I keep saying, it's the trans problem that we are trying to solve. And when we say trans problem, because you either see the trans person as the problem, for whom policies have to be created, for whom special provisions have to be made, or you or you see the person as this problem itself, right? So if you are a nice doctor, or a nice medical professional, or generally a nice affirmative person, at best you will try and create special provisions for the trans person, and worst case scenario, you will be considered as a problem. So in this whole thing, you will not look at the system itself as the problem, and hence we will always be put into this biological essentialist box, where um, the cis heteronormative system is not the problem, but the transgender remains the problem. And if we are to then imagine a trans affirmative um, medical or a mental health idea, then it has to be, then the gaze has to be turned, and we cannot do it by looking at the transgender as the problem, right? Yeah, I think that's
Yes, I completely agree with you, because here I mean in the trans community, the discourse of us bringing ourselves out of our spaces, no matter how, if they're problematic spaces, like it's the whole shoulder, the responsibility is on the shoulder of that individual. And like the fact that so many things like affect our lives are completely ignored. And so many times I have found myself being told that you need to change your situation, you need to work hard to come out of your house, you need to earn xx money to be able to get out of your house. If you're not doing that, uh, you're not hardworking, you're just lazy, or things like that. But there are but who will look at this aspect where the whole responsibility of healing and of getting better is just thrown on that person alone? But where are we talking about community healing? Are we talking about community spaces that help us come out of these situations? Because I feel those are more important than just putting the responsibility on the individual person. I would like to know of individual experiences of the panelist speakers, of experiences when they have felt this isolation, or y'all have how have y'all tried to change this narrative of uh, mental health is the individual's responsibility, like improving our mental health is individual's responsibility, and not the other way around. Like, Neel, do you have something to say?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Diti was saying, that it has to the system needs to be looked at, and that the gaze needs to be shifted from the trans figure, from the trans body. Um, Personally, well, I have been wary of, um, sharing experiences with the people, like, um, uh, not really wary, but there's an aspect of trust. And when you are a trans person, the trust is very vulnerable. It carries a lot of ifs and buts in your head. It may not be literal. Um, so that kind of thing has always been there. But I think what has helped with overcoming that would be when I first came to Delhi. I came to Ambedkar University, Delhi, where I did my masters, and there we had a collective space, very collective space, where there was a shared understanding of our queer experiences. Um, and I think that was much more, how do you put it, much more affirming than your classrooms in some ways. Not to say that the classrooms, did not allow you to do that, but I think the experiences in those pockets in the university were um, much more fruitful and affirming to my gender identity. And I think during that time also I started wearing women's, quote unquote, women's clothing much more often than I used to do before. And I think that came more from my understanding of the space that I was in. And I may not have been able to do that without doing so. So I mean, this would be very difficult to share with, as Diti was saying, a mental health practitioner who won't understand necessarily what dysphoria is. They would say that, oh, you feel this way, that's why you're dysphoric, you should do this, and that's why you will not feel dysphoric, perhaps, if you do this. They offer solutions, but they don't understand where the context is and how, being an expert and not being, we need trans peers. We don't need experts on the other side of the table. We need people who understand and share, as Aksa was saying, emotion. The emotion, the very fabric of life needs to be understood at a very ground level. Yeah.
Mm, I wanted to say something to add on
Yes.
to this conversation that's going so far. I'm going to observe to my experience in my broad engagement with gender, sex, sexuality, and like, and also the LGBTQIA population. So I'm gonna talk about two instances because Dan talked about like if we can bring out personal experiences from our life. So the first one was when I'm not gonna mention much, but then so we had this there was a trans person who was having like who needed intervention, and it was brought to our light, brought to our attention that there is somebody like this. Can one of your person from your organization intervene? And we did intervene, and we did a lot of things from our side, but what eventually couldn't work was what we felt was the protocols through which we had to go through, because first thing that we encounter was this lack of a shelter home for trans people per se. So we have to then think about putting the person in a shelter home where somehow we will be able to put that person in. First and foremost thing is we try to look for community people who can who can accommodate the person, but also in that case there was the risk that we had was this person already is going through a lot of stress, and most of the people that we knew we reach out to were also going through their own mental health problems at the time. So to also put on another stress onto another person, so it doesn't really, like, our organizational ethic do not really allow us to do that, because we have to be very concerned about the a boundary. So So yeah, and another thing is like we can't really like force somebody upon and also another thing is um there is also this within an organizational setting there are a lot of protocols put in place about the possible form of interaction that can happen between the client and the like the member of the organization. So there's a lot of boundary protocols, as you know. So another thing is when I myself is a trans person and I am sort of trying to take care of another trans person through an organizational perspective, the protocols seems to come in between me and that other person from actually reaching out to each other, and another thing is the protocols as from how I experience it almost seems to again do the same thing that we've been talking about, how put the onus back on to the trans person to sort of take a certain care of themselves, to put it in a very like compassionate way, say you should take care of yourself, that's how we can help you. But the point that we were sort of like I thought was something at the back of our mind, but we were not really tackling it head on, and something which we're still letting it remain as a elephant in the room is the fact that it's a systemic problem. Like a lot of like the mental health issues that a lot of trans people go through is because of a systemic problem. It's not really rooted in them. It is something that come out of internalizing a certain violence, a certain culture, a certain toxicity which is out there. So most of these intervention programs, most of these protocols seems to always again seem to not really adhere to that. So as what Neel also talked about, what we need to really look at is strengthening the already existing system of strengthening the already existing system of resilience and capacity and power within the trans people. And I think one of the things that we discussed yesterday about certain laws that has been put in place, that certain bills that has been put in place, which again harp on those structures. So then like one like to throw the question of like even the work that exists at the moment, where does it really come from? Again, is it coming from the trans realities, or is it again coming from the dynamics of trans people as this target intervention, quote unquote target intervention, as how we really look at it? So that's one thing. And so this is when one is really trying to work with available resources and available network, and how the system itself, not the system which created the mental health, but the system which is there in place in order to address the issue itself, again becoming the reason why we were not able to successfully lend our hand to this trans person, because as an organization there was a lot of things we were answerable to, and all of them came and curved us, and we all agree to the fact that individually we could have done a much more, we could understand individually what was the need of the hour, but as an organization we could not really step in. Now another case is of a very informal setting, part of one of my work on stressors for human rights defenders working on such caretaking roles, counseling, advocacy work, crisis intervention, case handling, and so again going through their experiences and also trying to learn from their own experiences of what has worked and what has not worked, is this case of a shelter home where a person, it was like how this person is a trans woman, and now how this person became part of this shelter home was in a very temporary basis. So like we know of certain organizations who are always looking out for homeless people out in the streets, and they're also trying to put them in government registered shelter homes. That's what they try to do as a mode of protection for homeless people, and a lot of them are incarcerated people, a lot of this happening. So I guess for one sometime this person was brought in this shelter home just for a very temporary basis. But what was the differential treatment this person had as compared to the clients who were already there in that shelter home was the fact that the clients were bound by the rules, because the client were cisgendered and it was a women's shelter home. So, the clients inevitably were under the record, and hence under the record of the shelter homes been under certain bounds of these policies and all of that. Whereas this trans person was something which was there temporary basis, so there was no documentation on that part, and whatever little bit of resources this trans person was getting was not so significant to be amounted or accounted for, because for a shelter home looking after 100 of people, one person's like space doesn't really matter. So in fact, the shelter home really turned out to be such a good space for this trans person, because this trans person refuses to leave, and this trans person from there on, the ownership came from there on itself, and where she started asking about possible help she could be to this institution. Meanwhile, not willing to register herself as one of the client, but being there as some sort of a helper, and not asking for something in terms of formal remuneration, but like, getting having a shelter, whenever she needs it, being part of that culture, that on home that we were talking about, it ownership was also coming from this person. So this was a very, like for me, this was very paradoxical. These two case studies represent really interesting, like on, and really threw up a lot of fundamental questions about how we are imagining trans affirmative mental health care model. I think which has been discussed so far, and everybody has been bringing up such interesting questions on this matter. Yeah, so that's what I want to add so far. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavel. Um, to the next thing that would like to move on with is how I mean we see more and more now this idea of queer affirmative therapy, queer affirmative psychiatrists, queer affirmative psychologists, and so on, like gynecologists, etc. There are tons of these Google sheets which mention that they are queer affirmative and that they have a sliding scale, etc., etc. And we have talked about this yesterday also. But in person, when you actually interact with these and approach these psychiatrists, approach these mental health services, they do not turn out to be as queer affirmative as they uh, claim themselves to be. And I want to I don't know if I'll find the answer over here, but this is a question that I personally had, that what are these courses about, and who conducts these courses, and who designs them, and who makes these courses that claim to be queer affirmative but end up being the exact opposite of it. And I would like Aqsa and Hari to, like, if you all have any instances or things to talk about this, and of course others also, but uh, yeah.
Yeah, I
Aqsa.
think being doctors and from the culprit fraternity, we are answerable for this more than others. So yeah, I'll go ahead. The in fact, when Diti was talking about this experience with the mental health care professionals, when we go there to get the GID certificate or the letter of support, before we can start a hormonal transition or before we can undergo any gender affirming procedure, I think for almost all the trans people, it has been a harrowing experience. And the professional conduct from the mental health care professionals has been only exceptional rather than the norm, which we would like to have. So before I started transitioning, I had visited three psychiatrists, two from my own institute and one from Apollo. And I remember the one whom I met from Apollo, and he was supposed to be in one of those queer affirmative psychiatrist lists. I've given a lot of letters of support to a lot of trans people and helped in making their lives better. Um, so one of the suggestions which was given to me, by this psychiatrist was that I should, before transition, before I could start on hormonal transition, start dressing up as a woman, get a male partner, and go out and see how it feels. And this is what we call, in WPATH guidelines or standards of care as the real life experience. And it mandates that all trans people before they transition should have at least 6 months to a year of real life experience to see how it feels to be the person you want to be, and see if you can take that challenge and live that life in the transphobic society around you. And only if you pass that test, then you can go for some kind of procedures. Fortunately, since in India we do not follow them by the book, many of the plastic surgeons or endocrinologists do not require you to undergo real life experience, but then unfortunately, many of the mental health care professionals, endocrinologists, and plastic surgeons make sure that until and unless a person has undergone some form of real life experience, they do not allow them to have the intervention of their choice. And in some of the trans persons, this can be a very abusive experience. It can be a very traumatic experience. For example, in my case, I didn't want to, dress up as a woman and go out in the society before I started my transition, because that was my choice. That's how I wanted my transition to be. And fortunately, I could have my way and do it accordingly. But not all trans persons would be that empowered to negotiate it with their healthcare provider, that no, I'm not going to go a real life experience, not going to give this test before I can get a certificate from you. So many a times these healthcare professionals say this because they want to help you, and they think they're helping you, they think they're making your life better, but they don't understand that they're actually making it worse. So there's this very patriarchal, thing that the healthcare professionals have when it comes to the relationship with their clients, because they think they know what is better for the client, and they do not even care to ask what you want, what kind of transition are you really looking for, in terms of various aspects, but they dictate terms to you, or they say this is how you should go, this is the checklist to follow to transition from male to female. And I remember a lot of these plastic surgeons have this before and after pics, something that the weight loss industry uses. So this is how, he looked previously, and this is how she looks now post surgery. And you can see that no one can really make out that she was a he, so what they don't understand is that, a lot of these gender affirmation procedures are actually forced on the trans persons and not really by their choice. I remember I was in a conference where a plastic surgeon was speaking, and they were speaking about this facial feminization surgery, as Diti also mentioned about how a trans masculine person is supposed to look. Similarly, when it comes to trans women, the aesthetics and facial features, naturally the standards become even higher. And they talk about, see, this is how a male face looks like, this is how a female face looks like, and these are the surgeries which are needed, at least 15 surgeries before you can start looking like a woman and pass off, as a woman in the society. And a lot of trans women, trust me, undergo these procedures because their plastic surgeon asked them to do it, and not because they really wanted to do. So a lot of transphobia is actually from our healthcare providers, including mental health care providers, as well as by the plastic surgeons. And unfortunately, when it comes to the healthcare providers and doctors, whom we call as the queer affirmative service providers, these are the people who think what they are doing is actually good, because for them transition is more or less a surgical hormonal transition, and not really a social, legal, or other forms of transitions also. So they'll ask you to undergo 15 types of surgeries, and that can be really traumatic. We have been trying to change that. We have been trying to sensitize a lot of healthcare providers on this, on even basic things as to what's the difference between, gender and sexuality and so on. So we have been trying to do that, but sincerely, I guess it will take us at least a few decades, before we can make any progress.
Yeah, so to add to that, the dominant discourse around transgenderism has been, so far has been the biomedical, as Diti mentioned, or the psychomedical discourse, which is frequently characterized gender variance as a pathology that needs to be treated. So sex, gender, sexuality are considered something natural, inherent, essentialized, linking often to biology, neurochemistry, specific genes, and in these lines, it is how transsexualism got classified as a medical diagnosis in the 1960s, and then it became a psychological disorder in the ICD, the World Health Organization's ICD 1975, and the American Psychological Association's DSM disease classification in the 1980. And now I guess it's slowly starting to change. The W path, which Aqsa mentioned, in 2010 released a statement saying that it strongly urges the de-psychopathologization of the gender variants. And following that, WHO and the association have changed their terminology, but they still have these terms within and but the thing is, even despite changing that, it has not had much impact on the actual medical practice. And what we do need to realize is that this psychomedical discourse is only one kind of discourse, partly in contrast with the sociological view that gender, sexuality, and even sex is socially constructed, and that it is not something real and inherent but a performative accomplishment. Uh, and in this background, so the W path itself has come about from the work of Harry Benjamin, and Harry Benjamin believed in a narrative of something called as a true transsexuality, and he believed that psychiatrists can diagnose this, and he believed that they should have the last word. So that is something that continues, and as Aqsa mentioned, that is the reason why the W path guideline still has well-documented gender dysphoria. So this is still continuing. So even when for my dissertation, I was looking at this gatekeeping, and the thing is, doctors are only one of the gatekeepers. There are a variety of gatekeepers and a continuum of gatekeepers. So I quote one person who identifies as a trans woman said, I quote, "I will not give you a certificate unless and until this happened, or you've just passed 3 months only, past 6 months only. No, I would like to know more about that," unquote. And another person shared that, I quote, "This gatekeeping includes things like discouragement, saying you can never be, look at your body, look at bone structure," unquote. Another person who has experience working with trans communities shared, quote, I quote, "Psychiatrists have their own notions of who is an authentic or an ideal trans person, and very often these judgments spill over to their interaction with clients," unquote. And the thing is, this gatekeeping is also related to their own notions of man and woman, patriarchy. It's gendered in nature. There is more gatekeeping for trans masculine persons than trans feminine persons. And it is also linked to the whole policy structure, which is binormative, and it is and I feel like just by giving rights to a particular specific transgender narrow definition of it has just gone from binormativity to something like a trinormativity. And so the way forward, I think, maybe is in allowing each person to identify in any gender, regardless of sex characteristic, without mandating gender affirmative therapy. But as long as public spaces, welfare policies are gender segregated, and there is power associated with this certificate, I think delinking gender from personhood will continue to be a challenge. And what could be a possible solution is to, instead of considering gender identity and expression something stable to each individual, if it is understood as contingent and emergent, just like some argue sexual orientation is, then maybe this contingency can be used as a basis for gender rights of all, rather than the basis being the rights of a specific community.
Yes, I completely relate to what Harikeerthan mentioned. As long as I mean, this discourse remains changing people's, I mean, changing this whole narrative, so that psychiatrists and the mental health professionals have will be very difficult. But uh, on another note, I would also like to point out how within the community also, the existence of non-binary and gender queer people, how our voices are considered as a, in a way it's considered as a threat. I mean, there have been instances where it's been considered as you guys are perpetuating this idea that dysphoria is not necessary for to be trans, and um, uh, your this agenda is harming our uh, rights and our rights as in the rights of people who identify as binary trans people. So this was actually told to me by a person who was a trans woman, and she claimed that this narrative is harmful for them, and this presence of gender dysphoria that we talk, that it's not necessary to have dysphoria to identify as trans, makes them look like they are not serious, and makes the state think that the state does not take them seriously. So this discourse, I mean, I don't know, like I feel like the fact that we are talking about the fact that gender dysphoria is not necessary, it I think it helps everyone, not just non-binary people or people who would want to have access surgeries and trans care. It helps everyone. It just removes this whole process that we have to go through to access surgery, and I think it benefits everyone. And I don't know if I have a question here, but I would maybe I'm just like uh, ranting.
Yeah.
But if anyone has to say
I
something
think I
about this.
totally, I totally relate with you, Dan. I think what we need to understand here is that even the community is very diverse. So I
Yes.
think that is what I think one of the thing that the conversation is also bringing out is this, that even dysphoria is also very relative as according to the person, right? Because when we
Yeah.
talk about a trans person, there is not an ideal trans person per se. And everybody, and also another thing is our transness is also something. I think it's not something so isolated from the kind of our own location, social location, political location, geographical locations, cultural locations, like. So it's a yeah, so there is a lot of diversity there. I think that needs to be understood. So
Yeah.
as for the practitioners, uh, just being okay, being willing, like being okay and saying that, oh, I accept people with LGBTQIA would be to just say that, oh, I'm willing to be that shoulder where you can lean and cry on. But I think for yourself to be an informed practitioner, you need to have worked with the community and tried to understand the perspective from the community's lived realities. And without having really gone such a training, I think this queer affirmative, as a lot of we talk about queerness, only goes on to saying we're open to having queer clients, like it doesn't talk about how they have done their own bit of looking into the necessary research which has been done. And one of the things that I think the trans community has been trying to say is just basically this, that the community itself is very diverse, and itself require a focus which is focus of its own. So we also need to, in terms of language, we need to also bring out like language which are specific to our own experience, like shame, how such a word means a lot to us. This was something, one of my experience about being in like this people progressive spaces, where when I had to speak as a queer person, and when I have to bring in my certain other identities, which is again quote unquote um, peripheral within the realm of sex, gender, sexuality in general. I mean, the popular discourse on it, for example, kinkiness or queerness or transness, still remains within the peripheral part of it. um like yeah, so uh the experiences very specific of being that marginalization needs to be uh articulated specifically in its own capacity, and not be subsumed under a larger umbrella. For example, gender-based violence is something that we are trying to understand, but the experiences of trans people needs to be really clearly identified, understood, and like accounted for. For example, when we talk about dysphoria, it's not just an act of getting into a panic attack, but it's also, if you look at it, it's a history of burden of performance, burden of fear, so many other things. Like, so how does the practitioner really understand the complexity of and also the diversity that a person may undergo dysphoria in so many different ways. So I think market is something we really need to be really critical about. Like if market are opening up, and it's very important for us trans people to continue with what we've been trying to say about the diversity within us, about the need to look into the lived realities and understand our lived realities for in our own, perspective, within our own capacity. And then from there on, that influences like the policies and stuff like that. Do I answer, or do I don't know, make any sense?
Yes, you do. I
I
mean,
would like to add to that question by Dan.
yes,
Actually, previously, I remember when I was diagnosed with GID, that is gender identity disorder.
disorder.
GID was considered a disorder, right? And later on, it was depathologized, and we started calling it now, gender incongruence. And then we said that, okay, gender incongruence is not a disease, but dysphoria is a mental health issue, is a problem which can be treated by gender affirmation procedures, and therefore that is a disease. And now we are also depathologizing dysphoria. So a lot of people, from the trans community itself, they are, with thinking, oh my God, what are you guys doing? Because we were trying to prove that gender affirmation procedures are life-saving procedures, because a lot of trans people who are dysphoric have suicidal tendencies, or they want to do some kind of self-harm. But by saying now that it's not really necessary for transitioning, you are defeating the purpose. Now how do we prove to our psychiatrists that we really
Yeah,
want this surgery, before, because
yeah,
without this we are going to die. So then these old notions, oh, you're doing this, just your fancy things because you want to please, and you have some kind of these fetishes, and it's not really a disease, so that's defeating the purpose. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of these debate happening within the trans community
within,
as to should dysphoria be really considered a disease, or it should be depathologized, because then how do we convince our parents, that, oh, we need this, otherwise we'll die. So yeah, it's a very relevant question that you asked.
yes. I mean, I completely understand. Everyone experiences dysphoria in a different, like different. How do I, like, what word do I use? Some experience it very strongly, some experiences not so strongly, and there are so many experiences. And even when it comes to these courses that have, like, that you can do and you can become a queer affirmative mental health professional, as Pavel also mentioned that I have observed that these courses have trans people talking in these, I mean, giving out lectures, but then that's only limited narrative, right? Like only 2 or 3 trans people will be there, and it will be their narrative. It won't be everyone's. It won't be like fair to, like, for the rest of the community, which has so many different kinds of experiences with in relation to dysphoria. And I mean, for example, like, I know a lot of non-binary people who have lied to psychiatrists about certain things to just get surgery. I mean, they have lied about the intensity of dysphoria that they face, or they have lied about um, the fact that they want hormones, but they actually don't want hormones, but they had to lie about it. And so where do we stop, when do we stop lying and just say that, this is how, I'm right now, I'm like, I don't hate my body, but I always imagine my body as this, and that is why I want to do this, not because I can't live in it or I hate it, but like, this is how for me also, my personal experience is, in my head I don't have 2 pairs of breasts. I don't even like realize it. Sometimes I forget about that they exist, and that is how I see myself in my head. And yeah, like, I also experienced dysphoria, but like, this is how it's been consistent with me. And I sometimes try to understand that how we can depathologize dysphoria. Neel and Diti, would you like to, like, add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have too much to add to it, and I think which is why we need to also move from this whole language of dysphoria to talk about euphoria, like, which is something that the conversation that we've been having. So I might not experience like this distress over my body being a certain way, but I would definitely experience euphoria or happiness being affirmed in a certain way. I think that is a language that has still not entered so much into the mental health discourse as much. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we always need to articulate our distress in terms of this, like, our experience in terms of distress, and not in terms of the kind of the kind of happiness it can give to us when we are affirmed. We don't all, I mean, I think it also goes well with the image of the bichara trans person who needs to be emancipated by this other expert, which is why we like to stay with this whole dysphoria syndrome. And we don't want to see trans persons as being happy in like finding joy in these small things which really affirm us, which is why we like this. I mean, it's so much easier to live with the dysphoria discourse than to talk about a discourse of euphoria, I think. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Complete sense. I mean, I keep talking about euphoria so much that I sometimes I feel like it's just like sitting and screaming at like nobody. But yeah, Neil, would you like to add about?
Well, I mean, fantastic points everybody brought up. You know, what was interesting that so Aksa was also mentioning that this careful balance that we have to endure. That do we need to get we need to um, talk to the therapist. We need to show that we are dysphoric so that we get surgeries. No, so my point, my question, not question really, my uh, entry point here would be that so there are many trans persons who that don't necessarily go through surgery, or they don't necessarily want to go through surgery. Um, and how do we still how do we still uh, bring those trans persons into the fold to talk about dysphoria, to talk about that we don't that they're to move away from to move away from the uh, pathologic discourse, would be to again bring into experience who don't necessarily want to go into that discourse. So how do we make that connection? Many trans persons who don't want to go through surgery but want to still get the welfare benefits, the the ID card. So how do we navigate that? We have a certain, so the state has this certain, and all of you brought this up also, that there is a certain fantasy of the state to create categories. The state wants to create different categories, to put people in different categories and push welfare to them. But there is no real work being done to understand why we need to make more categories, and why not our existing systems have that much space to involve everybody else. Um, so that is what I do ponder, that if we do think about dysphoria, then do we also bring in many different forms of dysphoria that you were all mentioning, as well, which may necessarily not be a medical one, but something simple as something simple as again language, something simple as going to the street in the way that you want to. Yeah. So this is, I think this has been a quite a contentious question in my mind, to navigate this space.
Um,
Yeah.
I want to add in. I think when I just observed at my own struggle with my mental health, I think this is so like the dilemma of both. You know, at some point because I'm looking at myself as a queer feminist activist. and there is also a certain burden that comes because of those identities, right? So I can't be just somebody who say, oh, I am trans and hence I am like down with mental health. I mean, people also look up to me for certain things. Like I am one of the person to whom people look up for like ideas on how to work about it, or basically. So being a survivor myself, I think like one thing that I want to observe here is that I think there is always this dilemma in our head to be strong or not to be strong. And I think that is where it's coming from. Sometimes we want to fit in because we know that it's a very easy way ticket sometimes, but sometimes you also know that this temporary easy way of like passing do not really, I mean, I can't just put on that effort every day to pass every day. Sometimes I just want to just, for example, it's like a woman who wants to talk about how they want to have like hairs and just walk in the pajamas in the city if they want to, because there is this gaze upon them about how they need to act in certain ways. I think I sometimes I feel the same as a trans person also. Sometimes I know that it's very easy to sort of pass when you put on a few bit of effort, but I also don't want to put on that every day. So, and it's always like a dilemma that one always like fall back on, to be strong or not to be strong. And because there is always risk on both ways. I really love what Diti said about euphoria, because I think it makes a lot of sense, because I think there we also have space to talk about our own desires and fantasies, and also like also a certain agency to sort of do whatever we want to do with it, talk about it, go ahead and do something about it with no sort of over expectations on us. Like the agency is so clear that it is ours to make. And it is, and one thing that is basically that I ask to myself when I think about if I'm gonna go to a therapist, or if I'm gonna, all right, admit to myself, which is the first act of really admitting, I mean, of really taking help when you really need help, is when you admit to yourself that yes, you have anxiety, yes, you have depression, yes, you are going through it, and you need some intervention, you need some help, and that's when you start looking for help and intervention. So yeah, so it's very like, why do I go for all this thing is very simple, right? That I want to be happy, and what is important is to be happy. So euphoria is much more important. And if I am trying to do something to myself, if all this intervention is all for the euphoria, and just as we said, like we're all gender non-conformity cannot again be put into one box again. It's just like so diverse on its own and very unique of a lot of their peoples, because when we grew up there was no literature around that really tells us what is the pop culture about being a trans, what is so popular about being a trans. I think that's also very recent. Nowadays there's a lot of words on what is the cool trans, what is the real trans, but that is also fairly recent. So in reality, it's just like a lot of documentation needs to be done. It really to be able to really understand like what all these experiences are about and what solutions are we trying to look for. First, we need to do that research. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think Pavel, it's such a relevant point to make that there is so much need for documentation and documentation of like multiple narratives, because where and now I'm so glad that there are so many um gay trans masculine people or like pansexual trans masculine people have come out. So for me, like, just to come to terms with my gender identity, because I have always been attracted to men. It took me such a long time to just come to terms with that. So I had to keep, all I did was look for gay trans men, like all the time. And and then so I did I now that there are people who are there are trans people who are coming trans men who are coming out as drag queen. I mean, it's just such a beautiful experience to see that these young people have that kind of um, resilience, that kind of capacity to sort of just have that kind of confidence. And yeah, I mean, I think I have had this conversation with Dan before, like, just to be able to say that I am trans masculine, I'm a trans boy, and I like men. What I've never been able to do it publicly until like a Dan did it, and and it just felt so much better. And yeah, this is why, which is why we absolutely need narratives, which is why like something like the Chinky Homo Project also becomes so important for me. Like I'm sure like we've had this whole thing growing up, we did not have to basically I think the first queer person I had seen from Assam was Ritu, and I can't tell you, I was obsessed with her for, because I was like, oh my god, I don't think there are queer people from Assam. And just to see a person who's vocal, who's out there, who has the confidence to come on TV was just like out really overwhelming. And I think that which is why documentations become so much important, documentation of so like multiple narratives, just like even if it's just like Insta story now, thanks to social media, we have like so many platforms and people are doing so many things. It's just amazing to see that. I think that is also where our resilience is built, and also it just gives this whole sense of like, you know, looking for home. I think that also gives that sense of home, that sense of belongingness, which is why I think queer people live half their lives on the internet sometimes.
Oh, I can't even stop about that. Like, I mean, I know, like, I've realized that I mean, even for me, like, the internet was the only place where I could be myself. There was no other physical space that I was able to, like, be myself. And, you know, like, even when is coming out as a gay trans boy, like, I was, for a long period of time, I was like, I felt like, am I going to betray my community for coming out as a gay trans man? Because everyone here out here expects me to be attracted to another girl, and I am not. So am I betraying the community by doing this? That was the legit feeling that I had, but I battled it for so long, and finally was able to like just say it. Like, I like men, I like other non-binary people, I like other masculine identities who are like me, and I don't think there's anything wrong about that. So yeah. I think we've like talked about so many things. uh Pavel is clapping. So I think that
You know,
only, yes,
sorry.
yes,
You go, Dan.
yes,
We're saying.
I was, you want to say something, you can
No,
please speak.
so with the resilience in mind, I would just want to share an anecdote. So Pavel and I, we are very close, and so when I came to Delhi, I used to live with her, like during the lockdown, I lived with her, and in the past also I have shared home with her. And you know this about the theme of resilience, the little things, the a very simple thing of going late at night to buy groceries um, in the dress that you're wearing. I learned those aspects of resilience from Pavel and friends like Pavel. And it's just so heartwarming to say that we learn resilience from those we come in contact with. I know our trans peers and our trans friends, our queer friends. Um, and I think there is where there is a sense of not just solidarity, I'll say more of a common space where at least we are not dismissed by our differences, but share that common bond of what makes us complicated beings. Uh, so I just wanted to share that interesting part.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Um, I don't know, like lastly, I think with just like one thing that is left, that how has the Trans Act been, involved with mental health, or is it just, does it even talk about it, or does it just leave it altogether aside? I mean, I would like at least 2 to 3 people who, if you all want to talk about it, this will be the last. Would we'll take questions from the audience if we have any. Okay. Anyone will want to.
I think the Trans Act has actually added to the mental agony of the trans people.
Yes.
And also the recent the abortion MTP Amendment Act, which got signed by the president yesterday. So, frankly speaking, the provisions of the Transgender Persons Protection Act have nothing for the mental health support of the trans people. It does, however, talk about, gender affirmation procedures, and again, the surgeries, and they have to be made available in at least one government hospital in a district or so. But when it comes to the provision of the mental health care aspects, there's actually nothing in the act. And even if there is something in the act, there's nothing on ground. When it comes to the mental health care services, accessing them is a privilege, whether you are a cis person, whether you are a trans person, and being a trans person only makes it more hard. So yeah, it's a disappointment to summarize.
Yeah, it is a big disappointment.
Yeah, also like the Trans Act does not see trans persons through their entire personhood. It just reduces you to like this um, gender affirmative surgery. So basically you are this trans body which needs to change from one end to the other, otherwise you are like whatever third gender. But also it doesn't talk about any other medical provision. It doesn't talk about sexual reproductive health rights for trans persons. And because Aksa talked about the MTP Act, it doesn't talk about relationship with any other medical system, just like access to health, as if like trans people do not face regular ailments. They just have the only ailment that they face is gender dysphoria, and you need a solution to that. And there are cases after cases of how trans people are, when they access the medical care system, just by virtue of being trans, the kind of discriminations they face in the hospitals, like they're treated as these experimental pieces, as this guinea pigs, that you walk into a hospital and you're being showed up, acha hamare aaj ek transgender client aaye hai, inka body aise dikhta hai. So I mean, yeah, mm, there is no recognition of the kind of violence and discrimination that happens to trans persons apart from this, which also like for example, the Mental Health Act, while it does say some things, like for instance, yesterday I was talking about how you have these who can sign who you can nominate as your emergency contact, etc. And the Mental Health Act, actually I read it up yesterday, and does say that you can nominate anybody as a as your legal uh, uh, somebody who can take decisions on your behalf. But even today, when you go to a lot of the hospitals, you go to a lot of mental health practitioners, they will keep insisting on having your biological family as the point of contact in terms of emergency. So I mean, on one hand you have it on paper saying that okay, this is where you are allowed to assert your agency. But if, for example, if the doctor or the medical practitioner is not allowing you to do that, what do you do? Is there a recourse that you can take? How do we then change the system in a from a more holistic way? Is also, I think one of the biggest problems with the Trans Act is that it does not really connect to other things, as if trans people just exist in their transness and there is nothing else that exists in their lives. It just refuses to acknowledge anything else, any other aspect of trans person's lives, which is what makes it so much more problematic.
And just building on to Diti, what Diti was saying, this is the very problem, right? We make a separate category. We make a separate, we don't try to make existing structures inclusive. We don't need a transgender studies or transgender center. We need to involve trans inclusive practices into our existing studies and theories. Um, and the very fact that we make it an exotic arrangement is the very, very fact of why we're still violated. And that I'm not sure also in the Trans Act um, if the amount of jail time that you have to do if you violate a trans person has been changed. But what I remember is that it is still lower than what a cis woman has to face. Cis woman, for somebody who violates the cis woman faces, I think, 20 years, but for a trans person, it's much less. So it's again that violence is so seen not as a very important element, uh, and specifically mental health violence, and not just physical violence. We don't see that language used in the act. Um, Obviously, because this act was also written by a cis person and convened by a group of cis persons. So it is quite a tragic thing that has been put down on our neck.
One thing that I'd like to add is on the basis of like quota and reservations also, because it cannot be just like giving away rights in a very abstract sense. Like now you have rights, now you can, So I think in some money, I mean, resources needs to be put in, like budget, it needs to, the trans population, the welfare for trans population needs to figure in the budget, in a larger scale. At the same time, in terms of like the people in the policy level, when they are trying to draw a certain policy that applies to all the citizens of the country, then you need to use lived realities of trans people as the lens also. And which is what is, I mean, the trans, as Diti also said, what the trans act does is just like try to address their limited understanding and the kind of limited like problems that certain trans people who they are aware of
Pavel,
goes through, but
uh,
not really opening it up to the larger
Pavel,
scale.
can I have 2 minutes? That Dr. Aksa wants to leave. So, Dr. Aksa,
Yeah,
it was
it's
wonderful
really
to
a
have
wonderful
you
discussion, but
to
sorry, I
your
need to leave. So
wonderful
just wanted to say thank you to everyone for this
and
great
yeah,
discussion,
you need to,
and would really want to meet you all someday and like talk and
yeah.
talk for hours. So looking forward to that, and really sorry for leaving early.
That's
And
okay.
please continue the discussion. Sorry for the interruption. Yeah,
It's okay.
Thanks, Aqsa. It was such a
Thank
nice time hearing you.
yeah.
All the best with the work that you're doing.
Thank. Bye.
Yes, Pavel, you can continue. I'm like so sorry that you had to be interrupted.
No. That's all. Like, so, I mean, one talk needs to look into that, trans leadership is also something we need to look into, like involvement of trans people in this policy making processes
Making
and stuff like
yes.
that. Not just look at them as this, problems that need to be like, not like fit us into, I mean, I don't know, like, yeah. Fix their system,
I wanted to add
which
to
is
Saransh,
so
do we
hard.
have any questions? Okay.
Not right now. I don't think so. We have gotten any questions. So, in case if there are any closing remarks, we can receive them, and let's then. I mean,
Yeah.
let's meet each other in the future then. After this.
I really wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to add to about how the Trans Act mentions that the governments need to facilitate access for trans persons. In the trans rules, they've specified this as creation of separate HIV centers, separate wards, and they do say that this has to happen in the next 2 years. So first question is whether this is the best idea, and second is, are they actually going to do that in the next 2 years? And towards that direction, to understand whether what is the way forward towards making health facilities, healthcare, health education trans inclusive, is the trans care project that we have envisioned. The first phase of the project is a qualitative study looking, trying to document experiences of trans persons in healthcare settings. And Diti had mentioned earlier about how this research that happens is, doesn't take into consideration trans persons, trans voices. And towards that direction, what we've, and this has also happened through a learning process. What we want to do is to make it participatory, and one way is that Aqsa is a co-investigator, and second thing is that we are conducting a series of workshops where we want trans people to come and attend, and we are being sharing our research design, research method, all the documents, the interview guide, the focus group discussion guide, the consent form, and we want to take inputs. So last workshop we were expecting around 13 people, but a much less number turned up, and that was little. And so we are planning another workshop, and this is going to be happening through the research. So I really want to invite each of you for the next one on the 9th of April. And even if there's anybody in the audience who identifies as a trans person, please come. I'll put my mail in the chat. It's on the 9th of April, Friday, evening 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. It would be really great to hear your voices in the research planning stage itself, so that we can do this the way that is most responsive to the needs of the community, and this can lead to further projects to make healthcare in India trans inclusive and trans affirmative.
Thank you for this, Harikeerthan. I think I will at least try to make it to this workshop. Any last words, Pavel, Diti, Neel?
Yeah, I mean, just one last sentence probably. I mean, I think it's very important that we bring forth trans voices and trans narratives, and at the same time we also need to think of how to not create this additional emotional labor for trans persons, where trans persons have the sole onus of educating everyone. And then we should be able to create platforms which uh, do it in a more where people have access to information. At the same time, it is not constantly the trans persons who will have to take the onus of, and the emotional labor, and the actual labor of creating this knowledge, disseminating this knowledge, constantly educating other people as well, right? So I mean, I a far-fetched dream maybe, but we need to also imagine, and think this is one.
Yes. Thank you, Diti. Pavel, would you like to say some last words?
Yeah, I think in the true meaning of solidarity and social justice for all, when we think of diversity, or when we think of group or collective, or when we think of, representation, let's not just, no, when we think of diversity, let's not just like limit it to representation. Let's try and understand each other's lived realities as well. And I think trans people have actually like grown up with this burden to understand and learn the cishet way of life. And yeah, so I think it's time for the cishet people and cishet system to try and understand the trans perspective experience. Yeah.
Neel, would you
Well,
like to?
I don't know what else to add that all of you has not shared already. But just that it was such a wonderful time listening to everyone, especially to listening to experiences from the ground and what um, trans-led organizations are doing. And it's so important that we listen to these narratives and perspectives. Um, I don't know what I want to add with, but just on a parting note that so today's it's also a discussion that we're doing to commemorate Trans Women's Day. So I would also like to say that we need to remember trans persons through their lives and not through their bodies. And we need to remember trans persons through the resilience they have always inspired. through the communities they have built and they're continuing to build. Um, and that I think should be what we take away from trans histories. And as we move into making a present that is trans inclusive, we need to keep doing that work. Again, bringing in euphoria that Diti mentioned. So yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. I had a
Diti
wonderful
says that
time.
your words are like poetry, and I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
I am very, very, very honored. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I think Saransh, like would you like Saransh is
Yeah, I'm
are
here.
they here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. I mean, it was such an enlightening session. I couldn't have expected anything better. I know that like Dan has done a great job, obviously, and it's so great to see everyone here. I'm really hoping that we could connect very soon again and take forward a lot of the conversations that couldn't happen. So thank you all, and have a great day ahead. Have a great
Yes.
year ahead also. I think.
Yes. That is what we need.
Hopefully not in lockdown again.
Yeah.
Many times.
Bye.